Imagine a weapon so simple it's just a stick with a pointed end, yet it brought down armored knights, shattered formation shields, and decided the fate of empires. Sound impossible? But the world of ancient projectile warfare holds far more than crude spears thrown in desperation. These weren't just sharpened branches hurled by desperate soldiers. We're talking about precision-engineered death, some with barbed tips that burrowed deeper with every heartbeat, others with iron heads so aerodynamically perfect they could punch through oak shields at 100 paces, and designs so deadly that entire military tactics were rewritten to counter them. Today, we'll uncover 6 of the most devastating javelin designs ever created, each one more lethal than the last. And the first one? It was specifically designed to make your shield useless. Javelin 1, the Roman Pilum. The Roman legionnaire stands at the edge of the battlefield, shield wall advancing. In his right hand, something that looks deceptively ordinary. But here's what the enemy doesn't know yet. The Pilum wasn't meant to kill you. It was meant to make you defenseless. Picture this, it's 216 BCE, the Battle of Cannae. A Carthaginian warrior raises his wooden shield as thousands of Roman javelins darken the sky. One Pilum slams into his shield, and immediately, everything goes wrong. The shaft is 6 feet long, but here's the genius part. The front half is soft iron. The moment it punches through that wooden shield, the metal shank bends under the weight of the wooden shaft behind it. Now there's a 6-foot bent pole dangling from the shield, dragging it down, making it impossible to maneuver. You can't pull it out because of the small pyramid-shaped tip buried in the wood. You can't cut it off because the metal is too thick. Your only choice? Drop the shield and face the Roman gladius with nothing but hope. But wait, because the design gets even more sinister. Some Pilum variants had a small wooden peg holding the iron shank to the wooden shaft. When it hit, the peg would break, and the iron head would separate but stay embedded. The Romans could literally pick up the iron heads after battle and reuse them. They'd turned their ammunition into a renewable resource. Now, how did this simple modification change warfare forever? Here's where it gets interesting. The psychological impact was devastating. Germanic tribes, who relied heavily on shield walls, found their primary defensive formation completely neutralized. Roman legions could throw 2 pila each. That's 10,000 javelins from a standard 5,000-man legion. And in the 10 seconds it took to close the gap, entire formations would collapse into chaos. But the Pilum had a weakness, and it came from an unexpected source, the very soldiers who wielded it. After extended campaigns, the soft iron would become too soft, bending even during transport. Which brings us to a javelin that solved this problem with a design so counterintuitive, it seems almost modern. Javelin 2, the Angan. The year is 507 CE. A Frankish warrior named Clodomir is preparing for battle against the Visigoths, and is holding something the Romans would have envied. The Angan looks like a Pilum's aggressive cousin, 6 feet of ash wood with a 2-foot iron head. But here's the twist that changes everything. The entire front section is wrapped in backward-facing barbs. Not just the tip, the entire upper shaft. When this hits a shield, it doesn't just pierce it. It grabs it, like dozens of fishhooks catching flesh. An enemy soldier in Burgundy learned this the hard way. Archaeological evidence from a 6th century battlefield shows a shield with an angan embedded so deeply that they would split in 3 places where warriors tried to pry it out. The barbs had created their own anchoring system. But here's what made the angan truly terrifying. If it hit flesh instead of shield, pulling it out meant dragging those barbs back through muscle and tissue. Medieval texts describe warriors cutting away their own flesh around the wound rather than pulling the angan out. Some chose to push it all the way through and out the other side, a procedure with about a 50/50th survival rate. The Franks knew this. So did their enemies. Which is why the mere sight of angan-armed warriors often caused formations to break before a single javelin flew. Now, you might think this is the peak of javelin evolution. Maximum damage, maximum fear. But you'd be wrong, because there's a design that took a completely different approach, and it's so elegant it makes the angan look like a butcher's tool. Before we continue, I have to ask you for something. If you're enjoying these documentaries and want to support me, please consider subscribing. It's free, and it helps more than you know. Javelin 3, the Greek Xyston. Athens, 490 BCE. A Greek hoplite prepares to face the Persian army at Marathon. His primary weapon? Not the famous spear you're thinking of. The Ziston was different. Shorter, only 4 to 5 feet, but with a balance point so perfect it could be thrown with pinpoint accuracy at 60 feet or used in close combat without switching weapons. Here's the secret: Cornel wood. This specific wood, harvested from the Cornus Mars tree, has a density that's almost supernatural. It's heavier than oak but more flexible than ash. When you throw a Ziston, it doesn't arc like other javelins. It flies almost flat, like a missile, because the weight distribution is so precise. Ancient texts describe Ziston throwers hitting islets in helmets at 40 paces. And before you dismiss this as exaggeration, modern reconstructions have proven it's not only possible, it's repeatable. But here's where the story takes an unexpected turn. The Ziston wasn't designed for penetration. The iron head was short, wide, leaf-shaped. It wasn't meant to punch through shields. It was meant to slip between them. Picture the phalanx formation. Shields overlapping, creating a wall. The Ziston thrower aimed for the gaps, the 2-inch spaces where shields met, where arms extended, where warriors shifted their stance. In those microseconds of vulnerability, a Ziston would slip through and find flesh. The Spartans took this concept and refined it even further. They used Zistons with hollow bronze heads filled with flammable material. Not to burn the enemy, but to create smoke upon impact, instant marking of targets, plus psychological terror. But for all its elegance, the Ziston had a critical limitation: range. At 60 feet, it was devastating. At 100 feet, it was useless. Which is why the next javelin we're covering exists, because someone asked a simple question: what if we could throw twice as far? Javelin 4, the Iberian Soliferum. The year is 218 BCE. Hannibal crosses the Alps with his army, and among his most feared troops are the Iberian mercenaries. Roman historians later wrote that their weapons fell from the sky like lightning bolts. They were talking about the Soliferum, and it breaks every rule we've discussed so far. This javelin is made entirely of iron. No wooden shaft. No balance between materials. Just 5 feet of forged metal, tapered from a thick base to a needle-sharp point. Your first thought is probably, that must be impossibly heavy. And you'd be right. It weighs about 3 pounds, 3 times heavier than a pilum. So why use it? Because sometimes, the answer isn't to pierce the shield. Sometimes, you destroy it completely. When a Soliferum hits an oak shield at full velocity, the kinetic energy is so concentrated at the tip that the wood doesn't just split, it explodes. Splinters fly backward into the face of the warrior holding it. The shield becomes a weapon against its owner. But here's the truly fascinating part. The Soliferum's weight is also its weakness. No soldier could carry more than 2, maybe 3. So why did the Iberians favor them so heavily? The answer lies in tribal warfare tactics. Iberian conflicts weren't about massive armies meeting on open fields. They were ambushes, mountain passes, sudden raids. In these scenarios, you didn't need 20 javelins. You needed 2 javelins that absolutely, positively would end the fight in the first exchange. Roman accounts describe how Iberian warriors would close to within 30 feet, suicidally close by javelin standards, and release. At that range, the Soliferum hit with such force that bronze armor would buckle. Shields were obliterated. The psychological impact was devastating. No defense worked. But the Romans learned. They adapted. And they encountered a javelin design that made even the Soliferum look like a training tool. A weapon so specialized, so precisely engineered for a single purpose, that its very existence rewrote the rules of siege warfare. Javelin 5. The Macedonian Sarissa Javelin. Most people know the Sarissa as Alexander the Great's famous pike, 18 feet of Macedonian superiority. But here's what the history books often miss. There was a javelin version, and it was designed to solve a problem that had plagued armies for centuries. How do you kill a cavalry charge before it reaches your line? Picture Gaugamela, 331 BCE. Persian cavalry thundering across the plain, their armor gleaming, their formation perfect. Standard javelins would bounce off at this range, 120, 130 feet. But the Macedonians had something different. The Sarissa javelin was 8 feet long with a unique innovation. A weighted butt spike almost as heavy as the head. This wasn't for balance, it was for rotation. When thrown, the Sarissa javelin would spin along its length axis, like a drill bit. This rotation stabilized the flight over extreme distances and concentrated the impact force into a point the width of a fingernail. At 120 feet, it could punch through bronze breastplates. Tests with modern reconstructions showed penetration of 3 inches into ballistic gelatin through period-accurate armor. That's a fatal wound, delivered from a range where the cavalry can't respond with their own weapons. But here's what made this weapon truly revolutionary. It changed the mathematics of cavalry charges. Before the Sarissa javelin, cavalry could close from 200 feet in about 8 seconds, faster than infantry could effectively respond. The Sarissa javelin extended that threat range to 150 feet, buying an additional 3 to 4 seconds. That doesn't sound like much, until you realize each Macedonian phalanx could throw 3 volleys in that time. Suddenly, cavalry charges became suicide missions. Persian commanders watched their most elite units, warriors who had trained since childhood, cut down before they could even engage. Some charges lost 40% of their strength before reaching Macedonian lines. But every weapon has a counter, and the Sarissa javelins came from an unexpected direction, not from better armor or defensive tactics, but from a culture that asked, what if we made javelins that could be thrown continuously, like arrows from a bow? Javelin 6, the Roman plumator. By the 4th century CE, the Roman Empire had evolved. Gone were the days of massed legions. Now, smaller, more mobile units faced diverse enemies across vast frontiers. They needed a new weapon, and they found it in something almost toy-like in appearance. The plumator was only 18 inches long, barely larger than a modern football. But attached to the shaft, right behind the iron head, was a lead weight. This small modification created something that changed late Roman warfare entirely. Here's what made it special. You could carry 5 to 6 plumbati clipped inside your shield. 5 soldiers could unleash 30 projectiles in the time it took to throw 5 traditional javelins. And at 100 feet, they hit with enough force to puncture chain mail. But the real genius was the lead weight's position. It created a tumbling effect in flight, not spin like the Sarissa javelin, but an end-over-end rotation that was nearly impossible to predict. Defenders couldn't track the trajectory. You'd see the throw, but by the time you moved your shield, the plumator would hit from an unexpected angle. Archaeological evidence from 4th century battlefields in Gaul shows something fascinating. Plumator wounds cluster around the face, neck, and thighs, areas typically protected by shields in traditional combat. The weapon had essentially made shields less effective through unpredictability alone. Byzantine texts from the 6th century describe entire formations of plumator specialists, soldiers who did nothing but throw these small javelins in continuous waves. Imagine facing 500 men who could each throw 6 weighted darts in under a minute. That's 3,000 projectiles creating a storm of metal that came from angles shields weren't designed to defend against. The plumator represented the final evolution of javelin warfare. Not bigger, not heavier, not more penetrating, but faster, more numerous, and more unpredictable. It took the concept of the javelin and compressed it, accelerated it, turned it from a weapon of single devastating impact into a weapon of overwhelming volume. And that's perhaps the most important lesson from all 6 of these designs. The greatest weapons weren't always the most powerful. Sometimes, they were the most adaptable. From the shield-bending pilum to the barbed angan, from the precise ziston to the devastating soliferum, from the long-range Sarissa javelin to the rapid-fire plumator. Each of these weapons tells us something profound about human ingenuity in the face of conflict. They weren't just tools of war. They were solutions to specific problems, each one a testament to the warriors and craftsmen who refused to accept the limitations of their era. If you enjoyed this journey through ancient warfare technology, consider subscribing for more deep dives into the weapons, tactics, and innovations that shaped history.